Came across something rather amazing, my friends. This is Tony. Hope you're all doing well. We got this rather curious thing called Himalayan pink salt. Now, of course, at first glance, you'd be like, what's the big deal? Well, it's kind of interesting, the shape of how this rock looks when you cut through it. And we actually have numerous examples of this. Look at this. It looks like something different than rock. Okay, you can see they actually have numerous pictures. We're actually going to get into a lot of things in this video. I'm going to show you how, and this is the type of rocks that look like actual beef. There's ones that look like pork, and it's salt. It's salt. It's Himalayan pink salt in many of these cases. And I'm going to tie this into some ancient writings. Okay, this is amazing. I was thinking at first, this is a little strange, and I haven't seen anybody else make this connection, but it makes perfect sense when I tell you certain stories that you might be familiar with. You remember a certain lady being turned into a pillar, of salts? It's in scripture. Could that have happened to some other beings in the ancient past? Oh, yes, actually, apparently there's numerous stories of gods, of giant beings being turned into rock, and salt is a rock. And what's interesting about this topic is when you start to look into how these rocks look. This is from a normal channel here. It's called Pure Farm. He's talking about how Himalayan pink salt is mined and processed, how it is made. This is literally all the video's about. Check this out.
Workers in Kebra rely on time-honored techniques, chiseling away at the massive salt walls.
Look at the wall. Look at the layers on it.
With hand tools and basic machinery.
Doesn't that look like a giant piece of meat? In at least in certain respects. Right? That's a little strange. That was just a common video about Himalayan pink salt. It's got almost 1 million views here on YouTube. Okay, so, I was thinking, okay, what, people are trying to claim these were, of course, beings in the past and they died. And then they actually show mountains that look like creatures. And there's actually one, it looks literally like a human laying down on one rock. Now, of course, you could say this is like looking at the clouds. You look at the clouds, you see whatever shape. It might look like Snoopy or whatever, right? You could say that. You could say, well, it's just a weird coincidence. But then you start looking at how this rock looks, and it's really bizarre. And then I get into some of these ancient stories that talk about this happening in the ancient past. Let me just play this real quick. You can see here the rock being cut. Look how red it is. That's just so bizarre how it looks. Right? Now, of course, they pull up various rock formations that just look very bizarre. You have to ask yourself, obviously the common interpretation of uniformitarianism. Oh, just everything's been the same. It's been millions of years. It doesn't exactly explain why rock looks like pork. Okay, this is literally rock. That's rock. It looks like pork belly in some cases. You can see there, it looks like a man. It's so weird, right? And actually, I can show you one that looks really bizarre. I've shown this before. It looks like an alligator. The entire thing looks like an alligator. Okay? You can even see how it looks like it has teeth. And of course, you've seen how there are petrified trees over in Yellowstone. Why can't there be petrified animals in some cases? Right? Like an alligator. Is that even possible? So, the question is, why does it look so uncannily like meat when they're rocks? It looks literally like a piece of meat. Look at that. That is a rock. You could use that as a prop easily because of how much it looks like a piece of meat. Look at this. Look at that one. That is a rock. He puts it on with a... I think here he's just trying to compare it to a piece of meat. I'm guessing that's what this picture is. Look at that one. It looks like a piece of meat. Okay, so actually it looks more like a... That one's the piece of meat right there. Right? That's the piece of meat. This is the rock. The rock looks more like a piece of meat than the piece of meat does. What's going on here, dude? That's nuts, right? That's pretty crazy. Now, I was curious about this, so I started looking into it. And like I said, before we go any farther, because I'm going to show you a number of other things that are kind of amazing, ancient texts talking about this, and also other pictures that are just uncanny. First, I got to mention, we have a giveaway going on currently. We're giving away five $500 Amazon gift cards. We're giving away a $500 laptop, 6 different things worth $500. You have easily a 100 chance of winning, assuming it goes like my normal giveaways, which only like 8,000 people get involved. You know, hundreds of thousands of people watch the video, no one pauses it and actually clicks on the thing below. You could literally get $500, and you could easily make it a 1 in 50 chance of winning simply by just filling out this entire thing below. And it's very easy. Almost all of it take you about 1 or 2 minutes. You just put your name and email in once, and you just click a bunch of buttons, and you get multiple new entries by subscribing or following or just looking at a page or whatever. And you can get multiple more entries and easily improve your odds of winning. Link is in the description for that. Of course, also this book here, The Lost Ways, How Your Great-Great-Grandfather Lived Without Electricity, How to Bet a Seller, do things around the house like they did in the old days. Hundreds of pages illustrated. You might need that book, considering all the wonderful things, I'm being completely sarcastic, happening around us all the time. Wars and all the other things. You might want to be prepared for whatever it is. $37, get the printed version. And of course, food supply as well. But if you can't get to the store, link is in the description for that as well. At any rate, so we have here the composition of pink Himalayan salts. Sodium chloride, obviously salts, typically ranging 94 to 99% salt, right? I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It also has calcium, magnesium, potassium, and iron in it. It's like, okay, that makes sense. It's basically salts, right? And I was like, wait a second. Is there any stories that relate to this? What about Lot's, of course, wife? You remember that whole story? She was turned into a pillar, of salt. And it was because she had disobeyed a command. And it was because it was for a city, actually multiple cities. I think it was actually 5 cities of the plain. If you look at the Book of Jasher, it's not just the one. It's actually multiple cities in this plain. And they had very crazy laws. And they didn't treat people very well. Let's just put it that way. They treated people very badly, according to the Book of Jasher. And I've covered that actually on my channel here in the past, many years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago at least. But what was really interesting is how she was turned into, of course, salt. I was thinking, well, wait a second. Is there any other stories like this? And another factor to this story of the city, these cities, of course, having this happen to them, is that they were trying to get with angels. And if you understand the whole concept of giants in the ancient context, that's how you did it. You got with angels. And you did something with angels. I'm sure you can figure out what that is. Mating, you know what I mean? And then you would have giant, of course, offspring. So they were trying to get with angels. Now, everyone assumes it was the men. Perhaps it wasn't. Maybe it was the women, because they needed to have, perhaps they had a religion where they were trying to go that direction, because a lot of cultures did that stuff in the ancient past. Maybe that's the part people didn't notice. They just assumed certain things when they read the story. They didn't think about, well, wait, what if it was the women? Wait, what if they were trying to get to have offspring. And could this be related to what we saw with the flood, the giant one in the ancient past? And of course, that judgment, right? I was thinking about that. And I was checking out ChatGPT, Google AI, trying to figure out what it had to say about these topics. Does any of the books surrounding the scriptures, such as the Pseudepigrapha Apocrypha, talk about wanting to bring back giants? No. The answer is no in the context of the story with Lot. Okay? Apparently with the 5 cities of the plain, including obviously the infamous one here, which I'm sure you know, they were not trying to do that, at least explicitly never stated. But if you read into it and say, wait a second, they were trying to get with angels, wait a second, what if it was the women? Then you can see how maybe that was the case. And that's literally what they were doing. And that might have what brought it forth. Because, of course, God didn't want this to have continued on the earth, as we saw back in Noah's time. Now, I asked ChatGPT another question. What are some examples in ancient texts of beings being turned into, of course, salt? As a form, of judgment, one of the most well-known examples, obviously, is the one we see in Scripture. Lot's, of course, wife. But then if you look at other ones, Greek mythology, Metamorphosis, I think is how you say it. Ovid contains dozens of examples of transformation as divine punishment. People turned into trees, animals turned into stones, etc. I think people turned into trees, animals, and stones. We saw that also in a passage about Nebuchadnezzar. He was turned into essentially an animal, at least in his brain. Well, maybe we're just assuming that's what it was saying. He acted like an animal. Perhaps he literally was partially an animal for a short time. I don't know. You have to tie this. You look at these other ancient texts and tie it in. And a lot of people, when they look at the scriptures, they don't do that. They isolate it. They ignore all these ancient texts surrounding it, when it could be saying something very similar. Niobe turned into stone for her hubris in book number 6 of Greek mythology, Ovid's Metamorphosis. These transformations often symbolize a moral or spiritual, of course, judgment akin to what we saw in Scripture. You got Ugaritic, how do you say this? Ugaritic or Canaanite texts. There's no clear evidence in extent. Ugaritic texts of someone being turned into, of course, salt. The cities. Okay, so what does it say then? Salt being a symbol. So apparently salt is a symbol of this, of desolation. Salt is a symbol of destruction in the ancient world. Even in direct transformation into salt isn't common. Salt itself had symbolic uses. Salting the earth. A practice in the ancient Near East and Roman world where conquerors would spread salt on a destroyed city to curse it and prevent regrowth. Wow, that's kind of interesting. So there's a lot more meaning to this concept of salt. Example, after Carthage was destroyed by Rome, legend says it was salted. A symbolic use of salt. So you can see there are some more interesting concepts that relate to it. But then I went over to Google AI and asked it a very similar question. Are there any ancient stories of humans, giants, or gods being turned, of course, into rock? Yes, numerous ancient stories exist in which humans, giants, and even gods are turned into stone or rock as a form of punishment. These myths typically serve to warn against hubris, excessive pride, disobedience, and vanity. Niobe, the weeping rock. The story of Niobe was the queen of Thebes and had 14 children. She boasted that she was superior to the goddess Leto, who had only 2 children, the twins Apollo and Artemis. The judgment angered Niobe's arrogance. By Niobe's arrogance, Leto sent Apollo and Artemis to basically take out her family. And she was, of course, grieving and fled to her homeland. Out of pity, Zeus transformed her into a weeping rock of Mount Sipylus. Water is said to continuously seep from the porous stone, symbolizing her eternal tears. So there is a lot of stories, ancient legends like this, even in the Philippines. My wife is from the Philippines. They have stories of certain islands being where the giants were, and they believe that they turned, of course, into stone. So this is very common in the ancient times, that this is how they thought. This is the stories. These are the legends surrounding these ancient gods, beings, whatever you want to call them, small g gods. Medusa, the petrifying gaze. The story of Medusa was a beautiful maiden who was punished by the goddess Athena for being violated, of course, by Poseidon in Athena's temple. The judgment of Medusa's curse, though the result a punishment meant for her, became a method of judgment for others. The hero Perseus ultimately took her out, but used her head as a weapon, apparently, on his enemies. Yeah, okay, it's to petrify his enemies. So you got Atlas, the Titan, made a mountain. The story, Atlas was a Titan who fought against Zeus and the Olympian gods. As punishment for his role in the war, Zeus condemned Atlas to hold up the sky on his shoulders for eternity. The judgment later, the hero... So this is interesting. The hero Perseus encountered Atlas while on his journey. According to Ovid's version of the story, when Atlas denied Perseus shelter, Perseus showed him the head of Medusa, turning him Titan into a giant stone mountain range that still bears his name. So this Titan was turned into apparently a mountain. And so you got lots of stories. Petrified ship, Homer's Odyssey, the Phoenicians. Is that how you say it? Help hero Odysseus return home to Ithaca, incurring the wrath of the sea god Poseidon, who hates Odysseus. Judgment, the Phoenician ship returned from its voyage. Poseidon, in his fury, turned it into a stone with a single blow of his hand, leaving it rooted at the bottom of the sea. Now, it's interesting regarding some of these ancient beings, these gods. If you can connect it with some of these ancient pseudepigraphical texts, like the Sibylline oracles, which was used by the early church, and it talks about these Greek gods as being actual beings, and said they were real beings. They weren't just myths. This is what the Sibylline oracles said, and of course, obviously, these writings like Homer's Odyssey say that as well. Of course, modern day people say they're myths, right? And it's been separated and distinguished from other texts, so that you just assume, well, yeah, of course, it's just a myth. So it's interesting. You have also petrified trolls in Scandinavian folklore. Trolls, monstrous beings depicted as giants. They are generally dim-witted, afraid of sunlight. Many tales, the troll is caught in the open. When the sun rises, it turns to stone. This sounds kind of like Dracula. So you have numerous stories that meet this sort of thought and criteria to actually bolster this concept of perhaps this rock or this salt rock could be related. And the fact it looks like, meat makes it even more curious.
We have just found what is known to be the biblical trees that existed before the Great Flood. And these are the trees that God intended to cut it down so that the giants don't use the tree in order to escape the great Noah's flood. Now take a look.
Interesting, because these trees are petrified. Perhaps they were trying to climb them when they're being cut. And they were also turned into, of course, rock. Something to think about. Very curious. Of course, I've talked about this some years ago. This particular tower here that has a very similar structure inside it to what you would see with trees. Again, you have rocks that look like meat. You have trees that are other towers that look like trees. Ironically, it's called the Devil's, Tower. Now, interestingly, I saw this other video about the world's tallest tree. This is from the 1800s. Obviously not as big as that tower, but it's interesting what they had to say in this video.
Check this out, the Grinnell Creek Giant. If this tree were still standing today, it would be the largest on Earth. but it was cut down in 1926, along with most of this forest. This forest is just 4% of what was here 200 years ago, and late.
So they cut down 96% of this forest, these giant, massive trees. And now we have far smaller trees today. Could these trees, some of these very, very massive trees that were cut down, be extremely ancient and perhaps be from an old world where there was much greater pressure, particularly atmospheric pressure, to where this would explain how the dinosaurs were able to get as large as they were? Because today, scientists say that dinosaurs could not easily live in our modern world because there would be not enough pressure for them to pump this blood throughout their body and things of that, and to get it oxidized. How did they get so giant? How did these trees back in these ancient trees get more giant than the current ones? Maybe it's because of the atmospheric pressure, or there are other things that were different in the ancient past. This would explain also how other creatures like alligators were larger. We see some of these archaeological finds of larger, of course, humans as well. I think also there's a factor of genetics. If they did mate, with something that wasn't human and there was no growth inhibitor, perhaps they just continued to grow, kind of like Andre the Giant would continue to grow because he had a genetic defect in his body. This is kind of my thoughts on it. I thought this was an interesting topic, though. I just kind of touched it a little bit. I think you look at some of these things, it's so weird. Now, I've seen a number of videos where they try to find, some rock or mountain that looks like a giraffe or like an elephant or something. But I'm just thinking to myself, well, that could just be some weird formation. Just like when you see the clouds and it looks like something up in the clouds, right? But then when you see something like this, where you see the actual structure of this mountain, the rocks itself have similar fibrous structures like you would see in an actual tree. Or if you look at this Himalayan salt and you see it literally looks like a piece of pork. Like, what in the world? I mean, it's a little too coincidental at that point, right? This is the actual rock. This is a rock, and it looks more like a piece of pork than the actual piece of pork. Like, bro, that's pretty crazy, right? I guess you could say it's just a weird coincidence that it looks exactly like a piece of pork. Just a weird coincidence. But of course, it's made 95%, whatever, salt. Again, it comes back to those ancient stories of beings turned into, of course, rock. But it still maintains the same structure while it's rock, while it's salt. That's interesting. You see what I mean? At any rate, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.